Tonight, though, I want us to start a new series. We'll spend several weeks, probably from now until Thanksgiving maybe, talking about what I'm calling moral apologetics. So before we get into what I mean by that, I want to just talk a little bit about what apologetics is. What is it? It's not a word we use every day necessarily, but I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with it. Defending the faith. It just comes from a Greek word that we see in the New Testament. In fact, we'll see it in our passage here tonight. That just means defense, a defense. So whenever we have to defend the truths that we believe, defend the faith. And that might come in the form of defending some very basic concepts like the existence of God, when you're talking with someone who's an atheist or an agnostic. Or it might come in the form of defending specifically Christian doctrines. So you might have a conversation with a Jehovah's Witness, or you might have a conversation with a Latter-day Saint where you have to defend the doctrine of the Trinity. Or it might come to defending some of the basic truths of the gospel. So you might be in a discussion with a Roman Catholic and have to defend the idea of justification by faith alone. All of those things are different types of apologetics. It is important to distinguish between apologetics and polemics. Does anybody know what polemics is? Polemics. Anybody ever heard that term? No? That one's probably less common. Okay. When we engage in what's called a polemical argument, at least when we're using it in this sense, the way that we're talking about now, we're not so much defending the Christian faith as we are dealing with some internal issues within the faith. Right? So you might launch a polemical argument with another Christian defending, say, your view of baptism, or maybe your view of the doctrine of election, or of speaking in tongues, or whatever. When we have sort of those internal discussions and debates, we're engaging in polemics with one another. Polemical discussions. You are defending what you believe, but we're not talking about defending basic Christian principles or basic Christian doctrines. When we talk about that, we're really dealing more with apologetics. But apologetics sometimes branches out into other sort of connected issues. But generally speaking, when we do it, we're talking about doctrine and theology. Defending something that we as Christians hold to be true. Whether that is, like I said, the existence of God, the doctrine of the Trinity, justification by faith, any number of things that we would say these are part of the core of Christianity. We're going to defend these things. Well, by moral apologetics, I mean not so much defending, although there's a lot of crossover, and we'll see that, but I don't mean directly defending theological formulations like the Trinity. I don't mean that. What we need to do today, what we need to learn to do today, that we're already doing all the time anyway, we just need to learn how to do it well, is defend our moral convictions. And here's the reason why. This is why I wanted to talk about this. That increasingly, when you talk to non-Christians, they're not ridiculing us for our theology. Not generally. They're not ridiculing us for believing in the resurrection, for instance. No. What do they find either ridiculous or even sometimes offensive? Well, it's not our theology so much. They're not really concerned with our theology. It's our ethics, our ethical principles. So give me some examples of maybe some conversations you've had or that you've watched others have that involved an attack upon Christian moral convictions. Give me some examples of things that you've seen and heard. Well, abortion's pretty obvious right now because we're in a political season. And the vast majority of Christians believe that abortion is a form of murder, taking an innocent life. And so, yeah, we see that happening all the time. What else? What are some things that you've had to defend? Not just that you've argued about because you wanted to prove a point. That's not what I'm saying here. Things that have been attacked, moral beliefs that we hold, that you or you've seen someone else have to actually defend. Sanctity of marriage, good. Traditional roles, gender roles within marriage or the church, or yeah? Or even the definition of marriage. That's really good. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. Sexual relationships outside of marriage, having to defend the traditional Christian view on that. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's one that even though, I mean, slavery is as prevalent today in the world as it ever has been, just taking a different form. But even though we the kind of slavery that we as Americans think of anymore, we're still often accused as Christians as belonging to a group of people that supported the slave trade. And so that's a moral argument made against Christianity that you'll hear sometimes. We have to know how to answer that argument. Yeah. Any others that you guys can think of? Yeah, kind of broadly alternative lifestyles. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. And that might fall a little bit more under polemical arguments, too, because Christians kind of disagree on some of that, yeah. Tattoos. Tattoos, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, some of those passages in the law. Well, what I have in mind for us to learn how to do over the next few weeks is not how to win every argument, okay? That requires, honestly, skill that not all of us have, and also a lot of knowledge that's difficult to obtain. We're not trying to win every argument. What I want to equip you to be able to do is have answers for when we are accused by the world of being the immoral ones. When our morality comes under attack, we need to know how to respond to that. It doesn't mean that we have to have an answer for every challenge, but it just means that when it comes to some of the bigger issues or the issues that are most commonly brought up in this area, that we need to know kind of what to say and how to respond to that, how to defend. We really are on the defense here. That's why I'm calling this moral apologetics, because we're looking to defend. I'm not saying that we should not advance our morality out in the world. I'm not saying anything about that at all. I'm just saying, what do we do when we're attacked on these grounds? What do we do? How do we respond? All right. So there's a few issues that I think would be helpful. Let me see if I can get this to work. Come on. All right. There are a few issues that we're going to cover. One is the charge that Christians in general are unloving. So my goal next week is to talk about what is love really, and what does it mean to be unloving. And we'll have to also talk about related concepts like what is truly good and what does righteousness mean. And so we'll get into that. That's next week. That's kind of broad and general. And then we'll get into some specific charges that are leveled against us sometimes. For one, and you guys have mentioned this in different ways, the charges that we hate LGBTQ plus people. That those who live that alternative sexual lifestyle, we actually hate. So we're going to learn how to respond to that. So again, the goal is not to be able to mount a massive, huge, airtight sort of case for Christian morality. It's just to be able to defend ourselves against these kinds of charges. All right? And then another, that we are wrong because we're told that we deny genuine gender identities. And I know these two are closely related, but I think we can deal with this separately, okay? We are charged with denying people's genuine, authentic gender identities. And in so doing, it's just another way in which we are accused of being unloving. And then we are told that Christians oppose women's rights. Now, this ties into a number of issues. We've mentioned some of them. Of course, abortion is always termed under the rubric of women's rights. Oh, that's why that didn't work. But also, those traditional gender roles. We're told that if you advocate for traditional gender roles, be it in the home, or I've had people get very upset with me for arguing for certain gender roles within the church and limiting who can be a pastor or an elder. We're told that if you argue for those, or if you urge others to follow those, that you are denying or you're opposed to women's rights. So we have to know how to sort of respond to that. Now it's working. And then this one you mentioned, That the Bible, and I've expanded beyond it, but we are told that, the Bible itself, your book, needs to be rejected because it endorses slavery and even genocide. That's what we're sometimes told. And then here's the last one. We are sometimes told that a God who would condemn people to hell, or anyone who would believe in a God that would condemn people to hell, is evil. It's morally outrageous to suggest that God would send someone to an eternal punishment. Now, there might be some other things that you guys would like to add to this list, okay? And we do have room to do one of two things as we go through this study. Spend a couple of weeks on one of these, or if you have a suggestion, something that maybe you've been having to have conversations with a family member or a coworker that's not on our list here, but fits in this category, that you want to talk about, well, let me know, and we can fill in a week with another issue that's in these kind of categories, all right? Any questions about these, though, that we're planning on talking about? How many is that? 1, 2, 3, 6. Yeah. How many did I say? Oh, that's right, because I combined these two, and I didn't change it. Okay, sorry about that. I combined slavery and genocide. That's what happened. I was wondering, I saw you guys doing all of this, and I thought, did I misspell a word, or, okay. Well, if you want to divide that one into two, if it makes you feel better. Because we always like to have 7, right? 7's good, and yeah. Should have thought about that. Oh, well, it's too late now. Can't even defend myself, so it is what it is. All right, so these are some of the things we're going to talk about. But tonight, before we get into any of those issues, before we even get into that first sort of broad one on Christians being unloving, tonight I want to talk about how we go about doing this. What's the right kind of reply? Because I think this is where we mess up. We have to remember that, again, we're not trying to win arguments for the sake of winning arguments. That's not what we're trying to do. And in fact, when it comes to these issues, we want to convince people that our way of life, our ethical principles, are something to be admired. But if we don't engage with people in a way that's admirable, then why would they buy our arguments that we have an admirable ethic? They wouldn't. And so that's what I want to talk about tonight from a passage that I'm sure you're familiar with in 1 Peter. I put it on, did I not? I didn't even give you guys the sheets, the handouts, did I? They're on the printer. That's all right. You don't need them. There wasn't anything good on it. Okay? No, it's all right. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so we're going to look at this passage, 1 Peter chapter 3. So if you guys want to turn there in your Bible, but it's on the screen as well. Okay? 1 Peter chapter 3. I'll read it out loud just so that we can have it on the live stream. Verse 13, Peter says, "Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? Suffer for righteousness' sake, have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your heart Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you, yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. For it is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, than for doing evil." All right, so first things first, let's look at the front and back end of this passage. Because the very first statement in this passage would seem initially to suggest, and this is why you don't take verses out of context, that if you pursue what is good, then no one will harm you. That's what it seems to suggest. But what Peter is giving us in verse 13 is a kind of a general principle. It's sort of like the Proverbs. When you read the book of Proverbs, you cannot take those as ironclad promises that apply in every situation. But they are often general observations about life that are true. So when Peter says, "Now, who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good?" Obviously, the implied answer is, well, no one. So he's just making the observation that when we live our lives in such a way that we are really striving, zealous for, we're striving after doing good things, then it's much less likely that bad things are going to come to us from other people's hands. Now, it doesn't mean that you're not going to get sick. It doesn't mean that other things that we would consider bad things are not going to happen to you. But it means that you'll be far less likely to come under attack of your neighbor, right? If you gripe and complain about your neighbors all the time, don't be surprised if they in turn do some things that are not very nice to you. That's a good life principle to live by, and we need to start there, right? Because it doesn't do us any good to argue that our morality is sound and good if we're living in our lives in a way where people are looking at us and going, yeah, I don't really want to be like that person. They're not nice. They're kind of mean and gruff. They're not considerate of other people. Right? That doesn't do us any good. So the first just broad general observation is, if you're zealous for what is good, you won't have to be as concerned about others trying to harm you. But again, that's no promise that they won't try to harm you. He goes on, but even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, and then when we move down toward the end, verse 17, it is better to suffer for doing good. So now it's almost like he's saying just the opposite. The general principle is when you do good, when you seek after good behavior, you're pursuing kindness and niceness in your life, then others won't be inclined to attack you. But the truth is that sometimes it's precisely because of the good that we do that we will be attacked. It is better to suffer for doing good, if that should be God's will, and it very well may be, than for doing evil. All of us at some time are going to suffer. It would be far better to suffer at the hands of others because they oppose the good you did than to be actually guilty of something bad. It's far better to go to jail as an innocent person falsely accused than to go to jail as a guilty person who should be there. So on the one hand, seek the good because you'll be less likely to come under harm. On the other hand, it's precisely by pursuing good as God defines it in his word that sometimes you will come under attack. That's just the way things work. So that being the case, we have to know how to respond when others do try to harm us or when they slander us and when they come after us because of the things that we deem good. Because we're pursuing things that we say are good, when we come under attack, how do we respond? So notice what Peter says there. Even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. That sounds a lot like Matthew 5:10. Blessed are those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Peter is probably paraphrasing Jesus here. Right? That there is a blessing that God promises to those who suffer because of their righteousness. So we first have to be confident in that. We have to be confident that no matter what the world does to us or no matter what the world says about us, and that's kind of vague, all right? No matter what your angry aunt says about you, or no matter what your estranged sibling has to say about you, okay? Make it more personal. Whoever it is in your life, whatever part of your family, or whatever group of people you work with or interact with on a regular basis, right? Those particular people, when they come after you, you don't have to worry. God will bless you when they come after you because of your righteousness. In fact, he goes on, these are some commands. First, have no fear of them. Have no fear of them. And then secondly, don't be troubled or shaken up, stirred up easily. Don't be easily stirred up and agitated by people. Don't be afraid of them, and don't let them get you all worked up. Don't let that happen. That's two of the three commands that he gives. The third one is positive. But in your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. And I think that's the center of our passage here. In your hearts, honor Christ the Lord as holy. Or, in your hearts, sanctify Christ the Lord. So we need to understand that in the midst of this whole section where he's going to go on to urge us to be able to defend, to give a reason, to speak words concerning the hope that we have, in this section, the primary motivating factor of everything that he's going to tell us to do is that we should want to sanctify, honor Christ, make him look holy. That's what we should want to do. So it goes to motive. The motive, the primary motive is, again, not to win. If your primary motive is to win, you'll become puffed up with pride. If you do win, you'll be defeatist if you don't win, and Christ is not honored either way. He's not honored. The goal has to be Christ being honored and held up as holy. That's the goal. Now, how do we go about accomplishing that goal in these kinds of circumstances? When we're being attacked for righteousness' sake, how do we go about honoring Christ and lifting him up as holy? Well, he tells us, always being prepared to make a defense. There's that word that we get the word apologetics from. Always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. So, the circumstances here are that someone is asking us. And he doesn't mean asking in a polite way, because you're having to respond with a defense. The question comes as a challenge to your way of life. When somebody comes to challenge your way of life or challenge the things that you believe, you need to be ready to make a defense. That is, ready to provide answers to their questions. So a large part of this is readiness, preparedness. Now, I said earlier that my goal is not to help you to be ready to answer any and every question, or to get you in a position where you feel confident that you can win every argument with a non-Christian. That's not really my goal, but we do need to try to be ready. And that's the whole reason that I'm teaching this little series here, is to help you to be ready. To help you to be ready to answer the kinds of questions you're going to get. And this is where this particular study for me is really important. Because like I said earlier, I'm not finding a whole lot of people, in fact it never happens to me, that I'm being challenged with complex philosophical arguments about the existence of God. Now, if you were, let's say, a medieval scholar, they call them scholastics, and it was your job, that's what you did. You read and you wrote and you studied and you taught and all those sorts of things. Then that would happen to you all the time. You would be involved in these complex philosophical arguments about the existence of God, and you would have to learn all this special terminology and be prepared in that way. But most of us are never going to have to do that. You're never going to have to, for instance, offer an ontological argument for the existence of God. You're probably never going to have to do that, right? And you're going to Google the term later and then be glad that you don't have to do it. But you are going to have to answer questions about what you believe about homosexuality. You're going to get challenged on that. And sometimes challenged by people that are close to you. And they want to know, how can you possibly believe that way? How can you think like that? So it's important for us to honor Christ by being ready for those kinds of questions. You have to know the world you live in. If you spend all of your time preparing to answer questions that no one's ever going to ask you, it's not really all that helpful. You know the world you live in. Know the kinds of questions that are going to be asked of you, and then do your best to be ready to answer those questions. You don't have to become an expert, but you need to have some answers. You need to know what the most common objections are. So that's what we want to do. We want to honor Christ by being ready, being prepared to make a defense for anyone who asks a reason or asks for words. Literally the word reason is the word word. Anyone who asks you to explain, to give an answer, give reasons, use words to tell them why you believe the way that you believe, for the hope that is in you. So I'm going to try over the next few weeks to help out with that best I can. Okay? That's my job, is to help you get prepared. What comes next, though, is entirely up to you. Because he says you're supposed to do it with gentleness and respect. That's, when we talk about the right kind of reply, it's a reply that comes with gentleness and respect. Now, that word respect is interesting because it's normally translated fear. And it's translated respect in the ESV and some other translations because some interpreters think that the gentleness and the fear have the same two people in mind. Be gentle and respectful toward the people that are asking you for a reason. But I think, given that the goal of all of this is sanctifying Christ, making his name holy, I think the gentleness is aimed at the person asking and questioning, always, though, with an eye where you fear God. So that you don't dare make a reply that compromises the truth. So we're going to be thinking about two things. How can I be gentle towards this person? And then how can I, though, not allow my desire for gentleness to cause me to compromise on the truth, which would be a failure to rightly fear God. So we're going to try to keep those two things balanced. If all you have is, I'm going to fear the Lord and I'm going to defend his cause, you will not be gentle. You just won't be. But if all you are is filled with a desire for gentleness, well, you're probably going to waffle and not say some of the things that you probably ought to say. So we need both of these things. We need gentleness, kindness, as we answer other people. So sometimes that means, this is just really practical, sometimes that means that you wait to reply. In other words, you're going to give your full attention to actually hearing their objection. That's a part of being gentle. That you're going to listen attentively to what they're actually trying to say. And you're even, as best you can, going to try to read between the lines or go beneath the surface of what they're saying. Because chances are they're coming at you, if they're having these kinds of objections to Christianity, they're probably coming at you with a lot of emotion. And the easiest thing to do would be to respond with the same level of emotion. But that's not gentle. The gentle reply will wait and think and listen and try to peek through the emotional layers that they've got and see what their real objection is. What's really bothering them? What are they really trying to say here? That's how a gentle reply begins its response, is making sure you're responding to the right thing. Because a lot of times what we do is, when we start, because there's that natural almost sort of anxiety and tension that kind of, you get that knot in your stomach when you feel somebody challenging you or coming against you. So I think, tell me if you think I'm wrong on this, but I think that what most of us do is we start formulating our answers before they finish talking. Like we're trying to figure out what I'm going to say because we feel like we need to be quick when really we need to be gentle. So don't do that. Don't start formulating your answers to people's objections or to their opinions while they're still expressing their opinions, because you're going to miss some of what they're saying. And you might miss a crucial piece of evidence. So they might begin by telling you that they are horrified that you would oppose someone, a man who really believes he's a woman, from transitioning. They're horrified that you would oppose that and not agree with that. And as soon as you hear them say that, you start winding up your arguments in favor of a biblical view of gender, and you're thinking through them. But what you don't hear them say, because you're in your argument already, what you don't hear them say is when they begin to talk to you about their son and the struggles that he's had and the difficult time that he's had. You don't hear any of that. And you come back at them with their same initial tone and level of intensity, and you've not addressed actually what the core problem is. Their core issue is, they love their son. And they feel like you're attacking them. Yeah, you have to listen. Gentleness begins with listening and waiting to respond. So Don't jump on it. Don't formulate your arguments too quickly. Be ready already so you can formulate arguments quickly when you go to formulate them, right? Think about these things in advance, but in the moment, pause and listen. Give them your ear. So let's pause right now, okay? Let's talk about, you guys share some situations in which you did not do that. Or maybe when you saw someone else who did that really well and you came to appreciate it. Anybody have any stories and examples, Christina? Mm. Oh, wow. Mm-hmm. 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 Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay, good. Right. Yeah, well, it's one of those things to where you go with a desire to be gentle, but perhaps, and we weren't there, so who knows? Maybe the pastor shared the truth, but where perhaps though that overwhelming desire to be gentle and loving was not coupled with a genuine fear of God and wanting to honor Christ as holy. That's the danger. Yeah. Hmm. Right. Right. We're gonna face more and more of those kind of situations. Wanda. Right. 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 Yeah. Well, and that is really the asking of the question is important because, we want people to know that we're actually interested in what they're thinking. And then we do want to know, why do you think that? Like, why do you think that disagreement equals hate? And when you're digging down into that, now not with a 12-year-old, but wherever she's getting those kinds of things from, when you dig down into it, it is a confusion in our culture that we'll talk about where sexual desires are confused with fundamental identity and personhood. That's a big problem. But if we don't acknowledge that, then we can't get past it in our conversations. We have to at least acknowledge that they feel like we're attacking who they are, when really we're saying we want you to live differently, to honor the Lord. So but that you have to listen carefully, and it's hard. Questions are the best way to get there. Greg? Yeah. 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 I mean, sometimes the staying away is the thing. I mean, we saw that in Matthew when we were looking, was it 2-3 weeks ago? We saw that sometimes you do have to sort of say, I'm casting pearls before swine here. In other words, I'm wasting energy and words and effort. But that requires some discernment in itself. So. Mm-hmm. Yeah. 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 Lauren? Right. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's hard. Yeah, it's not ideal. That's true. Anybody else? Any other examples? Yeah. Mm. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I mean, yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah, and you can be kind to people without endorsing what they're doing. You just have to be prepared for the backlash and be okay with it. Like as long as you're not actively trying to attack them, you don't have to endorse what they're doing. And if they view your lack of agreement or public endorsing of what they're doing, if they view that as an attack upon them and then they attack you, well, that's just what Peter says will happen sometimes. Sometimes you'll suffer for righteousness' sake. And that it just, if we resolve in our minds that that's just going to happen in the world we live in, it's not so bad. We're not shocked by it. So you just know that if you see them somewhere and you greet them and you say hello to them, if they ask you, why didn't you congratulate us, or why didn't you do this? And they may not, they probably won't, but if they do, you just have to be prepared to say, well, I just don't agree with that lifestyle. And then suffer the consequences. Right. And that's where we do have, I mentioned earlier, and we'll get into this on that week when we talk about that. There is, even though we're focused on moral issues, there's an intersection with theology at a lot of places because you can't untangle them, right? We're not aiming to defend theological propositions in this study, but we'll have to at some point. It's not our main goal, but we'll have to. And issues of gender and what it means to be, to be depraved and fallen and all those sorts of things and yet made in the image of God, those are all theological issues that you have to untangle to be able to deal with those kinds of things, So we'll do our best to get ready for those. Let me just finish up because it's 7:30. Let me just finish up noting one thing here where he says that we're to do this with gentleness and respect. And then verse 16, having a good conscience, so that when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame. So we want to come away from these encounters with a good conscience. And I don't mean a good conscience by way of convincing ourselves that we've done the right thing, but actually genuinely walking away without regretting harsh words or without regretting being provocative intentionally, but also without regretting having shied away from the truth. We can't walk away from these encounters and conversations with a good conscience if we are harsh and rude, or if we don't honor Christ the Lord and fear God by taking a stand for the truth. We have to do both, or we can't walk away with that good conscience. So that's going to be our goal. How can we engage in these conversations? How can we deal with these objections? And then having dealt with them, walk away with a good conscience. How do we do that? So hopefully, by the time we finish this study, you guys will feel a little bit more equipped. So let me close us in prayer. And then next week, we'll get into this issue of what really is genuine, authentic love. What is it? So let's pray. God, we thank you for letting us just kind of have some of these initial conversations. We thank you for the clarity that your word brings to difficult issues, difficult times. I think every Christian has rightly believed that they live in difficult times and strange times because we're strangers and aliens in this world no matter what decade or century we live in. But we find ourselves feeling that way now because of some of these moral issues. And so we ask that you would help us to navigate these things in a way that honors Christ. We want to be loving to others. We want to demonstrate our care for them. And we want to honor Jesus. So help us to learn how to better do that. And then more than just learning how, give us hearts that long to do that. We ask these things in Christ's name. Amen.